Excellent. Good morning, everyone. Excited to have you all here. Um, I'm the voice in the sky. My name is Lauren Rock. I am the Director of Community and Network Development at NEWaukee. We are so excited to have you all here today for a conversation on talent branding during economic uncertainty with Bryan Chaney. We're excited to have you all join us for this rich Q&A, but then an opportunity for you all to also ask Bryan some questions. We encourage you to engage in the chat. We'll have a couple of questions for you, so look out for that. But then also feel free to just let us know if you have anything that comes up for you that relates to your work and resonates to different opportunities for you to get engaged with us and Bryan as a part of that. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Really excited to have Bryan here today to join us from Talent Brand Alliance. Um, Bryan, do you want to share a little bit about yourself with the group here before we jump in?
Yeah, I see several friendly faces in the audience, but for those of you who don't know me, I've co-founded Talent Brand Alliance with my good friend Will Staney. We started it back in 2015 after a few years of conversations around how we can share knowledge and connect with people who do the work of talent branding, which is actually employer branding, recruitment marketing, and internal or people comms. So all touching the entire employee experience story. And it's a global organization. We're approaching 2,000 members, and we're actually spreading our wings a bit. And we've added some board members across the pond in the UK, in Greece. And what we're really trying to do is set ourselves up as an association who can help us all understand how to do this good work, and then also how to evangelize it and how to set some standards for the expectations of the people who sit in these roles.
Outstanding. Well, what an exciting time for this work with all of the shifts that continue to happen. I know we're all really eager to hear from you, Bryan, but thank you for all the great work that you've done in the space of recruitment, technology, marketing. Really exciting to have you share these insights with us today. So let's go ahead and jump right into the conversation. I'm going to go ahead and start with our first question here around just building trust. So let's start it here. What strategies can companies use to maintain transparency and trust with employees during periods of growth and layoffs? Specifically, we've seen a lot of shifts again happen with a number of companies lately that have been shockers to some of us, but then also for others have been opportunities where we've been in the conversations and have seen this coming. So how can people effectively communicate these changes while still trying to prioritize their talent brand?
So I think it's really important first to acknowledge that some of the people on the call, as well as myself, have been through layoffs, and they've been with organizations that have been through layoffs. And I think it's important to recognize some of those challenges, and most of them come from the perceptions and the expectations that go with what a layoff is supposed to be or how it's communicated. And I think a lot of those stem from opacity around how the company does or does not communicate on a regular basis, let alone how a layoff or changes take place. My last three companies have now, as of a week ago, have gone through layoffs, and it's interesting to see that pattern of behavior, how the things are communicated, and how things are they fall into kind of two camps. One is clarity. Are they actually sharing what's happening, why it's happening, and helping giving people the space to understand? And the second is really empathy, and it's around understanding not just the fact that these people have jobs that have either been made redundant or or whatever impacted, however you want to call it. I can tell you, I have looked at the thesaurus for all the different ways you can say that somebody's job has been impacted, and there are a lot, but we tend to fall on the same two or three. It's just understanding that there are a lot of emotions there, and it is a transition. You're empowering them to get through a transition and understanding that you're not just doing that for the people whose jobs are impacted. I'm going to pause there for a second. You're also doing it for the people who remain. And you have to actually take that into consideration, that these people have lost their friends, right? They're still alive, right? This is not a war, thankfully, for most of us. And so some of us are going through war. But most of us, when we're talking about layoffs, like, these people are still alive, like they've just lost their jobs. That just means it's not as convenient to grab coffee with someone. But it is a change. It's a change in their social dynamic. It's a change in their work dynamic, where they're trying to figure out, how do I now get all this work done with fewer people, with the people that I leaned on, counted on to get all this work done? I think the understanding the psychology behind that is really important. And that while that person's job might not have been impacted, I think that their world is absolutely impacted, for their work, but also for the perceived security of their future work.
Thank you for that, Brian. I think, that point that you made about thinking about all aspects of the company, not only, what people are perceiving of you, but also how people are connected, how you might keep them connected, as well as how we might stimulate other opportunities to just build that supportive system for those who might be experiencing that loss is absolutely key. On that note, I mean, there's a lot of opportunity as that transition happens, before that transition happens, to really be able to communicate values, and as well as really thinking about how people engage after, there might be a resignation of opportunities for people to be able to start with your company. So tell us a little bit about that juxtaposition of, like, when you're excited to tell people about the opportunities that arise at your company, those perks are, why they might want to come on board, but then also how that is married as things transition. So, like, what are some effective ways companies can showcase their unique culture and values to attract talent, maybe after something like this has happened, but certainly just ongoing, how they balance, how they highlight those perks, those company fundamentals, that mission with folks.
What I'd like to do is, while I'm answering that, I would ask everybody who's listening in to think about a time when your world was rocked, and think about the things and the concerns. What was top of mind? Most people go through the process of, like, what's in it for me? How does this impact my world? What is this going to mean for all the different places? But I would ask everybody to chime in to the chat, if you can, and think about, what are some of the things that were top of mind for you as you've been through that, if you've gone through that, or what do you think would be top of mind for you? I'm going to go back to your question, and I'm going to use a really old reference, and say that when you go through, depending upon the scope of layoffs, when you go through something that's unexpected like that, you're basically Kool-Aid Manning through the trust wall. And there's probably going to be maybe one or two people who get that reference. But what that means is, you're going to be destroying all the hard work that you've done building up that trust. And what you have to do is, you have to put it back brick by brick. And that's really painful to do. And it's really painful to do for leaders who have been sitting with this decision and this knowledge for a lot longer than the general population of their employees. They have actually known about it for weeks, months, in some instance. They've known that this is happening. So if everybody's familiar with the stages of grief, there's a curve there. Everybody goes through those different stages of grief, and leadership is usually way ahead of the grief curve, then way further along than everybody else is. And so what happens is they usually want to get back to business as usual before the rest of the company, because they've known about it, and they're thinking about it, and then when they've finally done it, they're like, oh, it's finally done. Now we can go back to the way things were. And what you have to realize is you've now, as I said, you've now destroyed this trust wall, and you have to build it back. And so what you have to do is you have to do that internally first. So I'm a big fan of, in talent brand, you have to have that story, you have to have that experience, you have to have that lived truth of the people who are doing the work inside your walls. Because if you don't have that, if you don't have the people who are employees actually believing in the stories that you're telling externally, it's really hard to get the audience engaged externally. And by the audience, I mean the external candidate and potential candidate audience. So for me, it's about getting their trust back little by little, and to go through that process of building that consistency. Now, similar things are really important to people who are external looking at this. So how do we now talk about this? Well, we went through it. Right now, you're in, unfortunately, this is going to sound really weird, but you're in a really much better place than if you would have done layoffs 5 years ago. So there's a lot of things, and it feels like everybody's doing it, and it feels like a lot of companies are going through this process. And so there's going to be a bit of forgiveness there. But what you have to do is you have to show that there are efforts in place, and there are positive signals, and there's a future direction that the company is going, and the things are changing about what led them to that point. So stability, job growth, and the belief internally from your employees that they are in a safe place. And if they're not talking about their experience, at least in after the first couple months, if they're not talking online, if there's not a culture hashtag, if there's not reviews that are being posted that don't sound like they're from sales or HR, then there's a problem.
Very powerful. I love that last nugget that you provided, because I think a lot of people are looking at, a number of companies have their culture hashtags that are resonating when people get hired on. There are a number of posts that you see on LinkedIn, like I just joined, and I've been loving seeing that, for a number of folks, and gets me excited for them, right? There's a lot of community that's built in, celebrating that next stage. But I appreciate what you shared about, as you look at the following weeks after they've joined, how are they communicating? What are they sharing about the projects they're involved with, maybe, or even the people that they've met? What is that sort of onboarding experience look like? I know, I could ask questions upon questions about what that looks like afterwards. So thank you, Bryan, for that nugget. Um, Really, even just thinking about the basics, right, around connection, around, being able to make sure that people understand what that culture looks like, how they live within that. Can you talk a little bit about what steps companies can take to clearly communicate their values, how they might revisit some of those interview resources, and set expectations for hiring team members, really to ensure that not only that they're attracting the right talent, but also providing that experience that you just commented on?
Well, I think if they just get some really big posters and they put them up in the lobby, that should solve all the problems.
Yeah.
Um, so in all seriousness, what you have to do is you have to tell the value story from the people who are supposed to be living the values. You do need leadership to say that those values are important, but you have to be almost the reporter on the street, and going to people across the different functions, asking them what those values actually mean. So there's the managerial approach of, how do we recognize these values? How do we look for them happening in the wild? How do we call them out and tell those stories internally? Because every time you use oxygen in communications internally, you're giving people the knowledge that what you're saying has influence and impact and importance. And so it's important to say, hey, we're recognizing this person who did this thing that aligns with this value that we hold that's really important to our ability to be successful. So I think that is really important, is to tell those stories, not just from the leader's point of view, but from the individual point of view, who can say, well, this is what it actually means to me, and this is why I was driven to do it this way. I think values are also relative and up to interpretation. So depending upon how the values are communicated, I've been in companies where there was a value and there were at least 3 different ways that you could tell a story about what that value meant to you, and they were very different because of the wording of that value. So I think nailing them around what they actually mean and then contextualizing them with story is really important from the perspectives all across the organization. And once you do that, you've actually got a lot of the content that you need. You need to be able to tell those stories. You need to put them where people can find them. You need to share them across the networks that you have access to, the earned and owned, and then you have them in really packaged stories, whether that's a 2-minute video, and it doesn't have to be a fancy video, but whether that's in a podcast, or if it's even just a quote with that person's picture that you post to Instagram. There's all these ways that tell that story. And I think the other thing that a lot of companies do is they don't weave those values through their entire process. So they have them, they may mention them in the interview process, but they might not be actually tied to the goals for the interview loop. And they might also not be tied into performance reviews. So if you're not talking about them and using them as the guide point for hiring, and you're not using them as the guide point for calibration and performance and rewards, then they really just are posters on the wall.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think there's a great opportunity there as well to be able to elevate for people not only how they can expand and having some groups talk about their understanding of the values as it relates to coming together with other employees, but also just being able to revisit that and see how that resonates with people over time. I think that's really key. That's awesome. Thank you, Bryan.
I think
Okay.
I want to touch on that just really quickly. So
Yeah.
you called out an open forum. So there's a lot of what we do is packaged communication. So
Mhm.
providing the space for an actual open forum discussion around what the values mean and how they're lived, and recognizing the people who do the good work, that's important too. So if you're in recruiting, you want the pretty marketing message, you want something that you can copy and paste, you want something where you can drop a link in and that's done. But what you have to prepare yourself for is the fact that we work with humans, and they're going to have opinions, and they're going to say things differently than we are, and we need to be okay with that.
Absolutely. All right, well, we are nearing our time here, and I want to make sure that we have some opportunities to connect with folks in the chat. And thank you, Bryan, for answering, during some of these transition periods. Folks, please continue to add your questions for Bryan. One of the things that we wanted to make sure we also highlighted during this conversation is just that reminder about how talent brand really impacts your consumer brand. And so, we're talking about values, we're talking about how these all are important not only for the employee experience, but also how does that resonate and connect to the business? So how can companies ensure that their talent brand aligns with their consumer brand? What are maybe some practical steps that they can take to really strengthen the relationship between the two?
I think it's so important for them to be aligned. I think it's so important to understand that you can't have a completely separate relationship with your consumer brand than your talent brand. And it's like it's like saying you have a separate relationship when you see your parent or your child in the morning or at night. Like it's just it might look and feel different, but I think it's really important to understand that it's really just a pivot um, on the same brand. I think it's important to know that there's a figure, and by the way, there is a stat that was proved false, but it sounds really good, and it was around Richard Branson saying the study and the things that they did determining how their talent brand actually impacted their consumer brand. Like I said, it sounds really good, but the story, I would call that anecdata. The story itself is actually around the relationship between positive association. So if you've been rejected for a job, you might not want to spend your money at that company. If it's a company that is ubiquitous, if it's a company that has a commodity, like a soft drink or or something that is just out there and you can't get away from it, that might change your perception. But for a lot of people, if you have a bad experience, you're not going to want to give them your money. You're not going to want to invest in a company that didn't want to invest in you. And so there is a connection there for that relationship. And a lot of B2B companies, they aren't as focused on it because it's a bit removed from their candidate experience and the dollars that are spent for their company. But a consumer brand, they're going to understand that all day long. They're going to understand that their experience and how they treat people and the messaging and everything that goes out is connected almost directly with their ability and to make money and their perception in the market.
Any specific tips that you might share as people think about how they're building that out, especially if they haven't done it before? Would love to hear just maybe one nugget or two about how to advance that.
Yeah. So from a consumer brand standpoint, you have to have close relationships with your marketing partners. So depending upon where you sit within the organization, you have to understand not just the messaging, but how to accurately align the messaging with the consumer brand and the consumer promise. And the other piece of that is getting your candidate experience measured. And for those of you who might not be doing this already, the Candidate Experience Awards are a great resource. You can do it on your own. You don't have to do it you don't have to go through some big, technology vendor. You can do something as simple as a Google form or SurveyMonkey, and get the data around purchase intent. So it's asking very specific questions in the process. It's, do you feel like you were given an opportunity to show your value in the interview? And we're talking about candidate experience here. Obviously, there's layers of this, but are you given the opportunity to show your value? And how did your experience in this process impact or change your perception of our brand? And then you go a step further depending upon your products, and it's, how did that impact your perception of our product? And people can actually rate on a Likert scale how much it will have impacted their perception and their decision to invest their time and money. So asking the question is the really dirt simple tip to understand what that is doing over time, and then to do it consistently. You can't go out with one piece of data and say, oh, we need to change everything because I asked these 40 people one time how the recruiting process impacted their view of our products. but you have to do it consistently over time. It has to be built into your process. And that gives you baseline data. And that also gives you a story to tell around specific things that happen or that don't happen that will impact the candidate experience, that also impact what you're doing as a consumer or consumer facing organization. So if there's a product release, if there's things that are happening, if there's an IPO, if there's all these things that are happening, you can actually tie back the perception within the market of all the people that you're reaching to your potential for that success.
Thank you for those nuggets, Brian. Really excited to not only be able to hear some of the tactics that you all have shared, especially during some of your summits, but also just some new ones, especially around being able to go back to the basics of realigning with your marketing team. I think that's, a really key component of partnership internally, as well as we think about how we develop a connectedness as we develop on ROI, as well as that importance of really investing in the talent brand space and what your employer brand and those leaders who are leading those efforts are really focused on. So thank you for those tips. We are right here at time, but one question for those of you again who are managing EVPs and starting to lead those. Brian, one of the questions that we got before the event was just what are some quick examples outside of pay and benefits that are attractive brand elements to include as a part of an EVP? And then we'll be sure to share some the other questions with Brian and share those with you all post event.
Yeah, obviously pay and benefits are big. I use an acronym that I developed a while back to think about what's driving people to make these decisions. And it's what gets you amped. And A in amped is advancement. So career advancement, progression, the next promotion, changing focus, adding to your skill sets, personal development. M in amped is money. It's remuneration. It's all the perks, benefits, everything that you get in your hand as a result of that experience, but also the some of the intangibles as well. Like, okay, what is the office like? What is that like? That's also a form of that remuneration. So advancement, money, people. So the people are actually the culture. Who are you going to learn from? And culture is this word that you ask 10 people what it means to them, and you're going to get at least 10 different answers. But when you talk about people, it's who are you going to work around? Who are you going to learn from? Who are the people that are going to influence your development for the next however many years or whatever that time looks like? So the people that you're going to be working with and connected to, how is that going to influence your well-being? And then T in amped stands for technology. And that's a really broad term that really is looking at more at innovation. Is this company doing something that no other company is doing? Are they doing it in a way that nobody else is doing it? There's thank you very much, Rita. But understanding that that innovation is compelling for a lot of people. Ask anybody who joined a startup. They want to do something that nobody else is doing because they feel a bit of self-worth for that, and they know that that's going to increase their marketability. Now, the last thing, you're like, okay, that's done, but wait, Brian said, what gets you amped? The letter U is unemployment. That is a driver for some people, and that is a driver it's a driver that's hard to speak to. But if you're posting a job on LinkedIn and you say, hi, I have this job, do you know anyone who might be a good fit? You're talking to the people who care mostly about unemployment. So understanding the message that you put out there is going to be speaking to these different motivators. So what gets you amped? That's how I think about it. There's variations, there's levels in there that I actually use and break out when I'm doing an EVP project, which I did about 6 months ago, and I'm getting ready to start another one.
Outstanding. So you know who to reach out to, right? Brian, thank you for your time. Everyone, thank you for staying on for a couple extra minutes to get the most out of our morning. Great kicking start to the day. Thank you everyone for joining us. Please follow us for access to the recording. Please reach out to Bryan on LinkedIn. Please connect with Talent Brand Alliance. Follow and subscribe. I'm really excited to have you all join us, and we look forward to the next time that we can all be together. Take care, everyone. Thanks, Bryan.
Thanks, y'all. Have a great one.